Hey everybody. Today we're talking about type 1 and type 2 errors in statistical hypothesis testing. At the start of a test, the null hypothesis could be true or it could be false, and at the end, it could be rejected or not. So altogether, we have 4 possible combinations of outcomes that are summarized here in this table, and fundamentally 2 of them feel good and 2 of them don't. When the null hypothesis is true, we'd like it to not be rejected. And when the null hypothesis is false, we'd like it to be rejected. If one of those things doesn't happen, we feel like something has gone wrong. Specifically, there are 2 kind of different things that can go wrong. First, the null hypothesis is rejected when in fact it's true, and this is called a type 1 error or false positive. The second thing that can go wrong is when the null hypothesis is not rejected even though it is false, and this is called a type 2 error or false negative. And the terms false positive and false negative come from medical testing, which is using pretty much exactly the same logic as statistical hypothesis testing. With this terminology in hand, we can get a more complete table than the one we saw at the start of this vid. Again, when the null hypothesis is true but it's rejected, that is a type 1 error. When the null hypothesis is false but it's not rejected, that's a type 2 error. One thing to keep in mind is that we almost never actually know whether the null hypothesis is true or not. It's just not information we have access to. If we did, why would we be running a hypothesis test in the first place? But this language is still really useful in a lot of different ways. We just tend to use it in the hypothetical, in the conditional. So an example of something that we say all the time, the significance level alpha of a hypothesis test represents the acceptable probability of a type 1 error when the null hypothesis is true. Notice the phrase when the null hypothesis is true, so there's the conditional statement that I was referring to a second ago. All right, let's do an example. You should pause the vid, try and write down what a type 1 and a type 2 error would look like in this scenario. The manufacturer of a certain brand of chocolate bar claims that, on average, their bars weigh 350 grams, but I suspect this may be an overestimate. So a type 1 error, or false positive, would occur when the null hypothesis is true, that is, the mean weight of the candy bars is 350 grams, but we conclude that it's not. We reject the null and conclude that the mean weight is less than 350 grams. A type 2 error would be if we drew no conclusion about the mean weight, when in fact the candy bars weighed less than 350 grams on average. So a false negative. The candy bars weighed less than they were supposed to, but our test didn't pick it up. One more example, same thing as before, so pause the video here. A restaurant claims that the mean sodium of one of its sandwiches is 920 milligrams. A type 1 error would occur if we were to conclude that the mean sodium content is not 920 milligrams when in fact it is. A type 2 error would occur if we were to draw no conclusions about the mean sodium content when in fact it's not 920 milligrams.